When did you realize you married the wrong sibling? I thought we were happy, I thought we were in love. I have been married to my wife for 6 years. I'll call her Annie. Annie and I met during our last years in college and hit it off almost immediately. She was your typical blonde college girl, fun, wild, hot, and very social. I was just an international student from Europe who around that time was used to dull and introverted women all my life and felt very lucky to meet her and coincidentally after graduation, marry her. We moved to Miami because she wanted to live by the coast and wanted a house there. I obliged. Annie was a housewife, per her request, and I really didn't mind. As a lawyer, I earned more than enough to support the family on my own. I let Annie have whatever she wanted and at any amount she pleased. We had 2 children during our 6 years of marriage, and despite my working life, I contributed largely to their upbringing. She had a more social life than I did, but it was fine by me. All in all, we were alright, everything was alright. That was what I thought. Things began to change when my wife began to get obsessed with her phone. Annie was always on her phone normally. I think she had an active social media life as well, posting videos and all that, but it began to be too much. She would just sit at a corner for hours on her phone, texting. I knew she was texting because I once caught a glance of it. I didn't know who she was texting, but I just knew it was always the same person. I didn't want to think much of it at first, but she began to act suspicious. She would start leaving the room when she wanted to take calls, and she put a password on all her devices and would always place her phone down when she charged it. When I made the mistake of confronting her about it, she went all out on me and accused me of getting in her privacy, of wanting to control her and picking on everything she does. I apologized and left her alone. My suspicions still stood, but I didn't have anyone to talk to and I was getting worried with every passing time. I've heard stories relating to what was happening and I wish that I was going to be wrong. A few days later, Annie's sister came to visit. I'll call her Marie. Annie and Marie were fraternal twins but did share similar traits for you to clearly tell that they were sisters. Though they were twins, they were very different, and sometimes I wonder if my life would have been better had I met Marie first. Marie was calm and mature, and she was as beautiful as her sister, and she was every other thing that Annie wasn't. She wasn't in a relationship from what I know and was focusing on her career. She was growing a skincare brand. It was because I knew her to be just and understanding that I thought about discussing her sister's behavior with her. I only held back when I remembered that all in all, Marie and Annie were sisters, and as such, there is a huge chance that this would make things worse for me. However, I did not need to contemplate any more because at the end of the day it was Marie who called me to talk about her sister. We had all been sitting at the dining room table drinking wine and eating pizza while playing a board game when Annie got a notification for a text, and from then on, she became distracted. Marie would call her back to the game every now and then. Annie got a call and stood up immediately to answer it, and I could tell that Marie was confused at her behavior because a few minutes later, when my wife did not return, Marie went to meet her and I sat alone till she came back. The first thing she asked was, "Has she always been like this? On the phone 24/7 and acting distracted and suspicious?" It was the opening I was looking for, and I told Marie everything. She didn't judge me and told me that I should look into it. She even told me whatever happened I should understand that Annie was always foolish and immature and I should always be the bigger and forgiving person. I understood what Marie was saying. If I found out that my wife was cheating on me, I should have it in me to forgive. I knew that Marie tried to talk to Annie, and I also knew that my wife did not listen. That was probably why Marie told me she would be coming often to check on the children, and I was grateful. It was stressful doing it alone nowadays. I continued to live in doubt for weeks until one night luck shined on my side. Annie, after coming home one night from a party with her girlfriends, was very drunk and half asleep as she walked into the house and threw herself on the bed. As she did, her purse fell on the floor, and as I went to pick it up, her phone slipped out and I saw that it was unlocked. This was my chance, and you can be sure that I took it. I went through her phone and what I found broke me. Annie was cheating, yes, but she was also making a fool out of me. The person she was cheating with was a man named Tim, someone she had met on social media, and from what I read, someone she had seen a number of times. Annie's messages to this man were not only about their affair but about me because the man knew she was married. My wife made fun of me with her lover, calling me all sorts of things, laughing at my insecurities and my deepest secrets that I entrusted to her. Annie called me a fool, mocked my love for her, and used me. I read every single message between them and listened to the voice notes too. When I was done, I sent them to my phone, dropped hers and went to sit on the couch, in the darkness and in tears. I never imagined I would feel a pain as intense as this. I felt open, I felt naked, and I felt used. What was it exactly that caused this? I gave her everything she needed, I treated her like a queen, I did whatever she asked and compromised so that she could be comfortable. I loved her to bits and she did this to me? I didn't know when I picked up the phone and called Marie. It was a good thing that Annie was dead ass drunk, or she would have heard my sobs and words. Marie didn't say much, she listened to me and consoled me, telling me it would be okay. After an hour, I decided I was better. I took a shower and slept on the couch. The next day, when Annie asked why she didn't wake up to see me on the bed next to her, I gave her the excuse that I didn't want to disturb her. Later that afternoon, when she left for the mall, I took the kids with me to see Marie, and while they played with her dog, we talked and I showed her the messages I transferred to my phone. Marie was shocked and so embarrassed that she began to cry. She told me how sorry she was that all this was happening, and I began to tell her it's not her fault. She began to say that maybe it was a mistake. I haven't exactly caught Annie red-handed. I knew she was really concerned for her sister if I divorced her. She knew how I treated Annie and how Annie was about to lose it all. I told Marie to help me look after the children once in a while and I would look for proof. I also made Marie promise me that she would not tell Annie anything. I did just that. I would wait for Annie to leave her phone and then I connected it to mine so I got all her messages. The day she told me she would have a get-together with her girlfriends in the suburbs for 3 days, I agreed. I had already let go of any feelings for Annie at this point. She was a bad wife and an unfit mother who was never there with the kids. I knew the girlfriend's tale was a lie. She was going to meet with the Tim guy. I had asked Marie beforehand to help me get in contact with the man's wife after she said she saw his profile on Facebook. I texted the wife and we met up that day and I told and showed her everything. She said she already suspected it but had no proof. She said Tim told her he had to travel for business and would be back after 3 days. Ironic. After 2 days, when Annie was supposed to return the next day and after I found out the location of Annie and Tim, I dropped the kids off with Marie's mother and hopped in my car with Marie and Tim's wife, driving to the hotel where my wife and the bastard were. It wasn't very hard to bribe the receptionist after explaining our ordeal and get the key to the room. We all went to the door, Marie shaking, Tim's wife on the verge of tears and me. I felt nothing but disgust and seething anger. We walked in on them in the act and armed with my phone ready, I snapped away before they could cover themselves. Annie began to beg. Marie walked up to her and slapped her while crying. Why would you do this? You had everything. Look at what you've done to yourself and your kids. I left immediately with Marie, letting Tim's wife hit and yell at her unfaithful husband as she threatened divorce. I didn't bother to talk to Tim or Annie who begged me. I just left. We drove in silence till I got to my house. That's when I let it all out for the last time, screaming and crying in pain as Marie calmed me down. Once I was calm and with Marie watching, I sent the pictures and the chats to her mother and the contacts of the family members I knew. I also posted it on the timeline of every single page she had. Marie apologized as though it was her fault, the innocent woman crying over her foolish sister. I didn't leave the house even as Marie went to bring the kids back. Annie didn't come home either and there were a lot of messages on my phone from her family but I ignored it. That night, Marie and I slept together. No, we didn't actually hook up, but we fell asleep on the couch together after putting the kids to bed. There was no reason to and no thoughts about it but it was calming. The next day I contacted my lawyer to prepare the divorce papers. I had Annie's things moved to her parents' house. That afternoon she came begging and crying on her knees, blaming the devil, lust, Tim, anything but her. I threatened to call the police if she didn't leave. She didn't, she stayed there till evening when her parents came and used that opportunity to get in the house. They apologized on her behalf as well, but it wasn't their fault. They understood my decision to leave her and begged that they be able to see their grandchildren when everything was over. They were very disappointed in Annie, everyone was. When Annie saw Marie in the house, she began to say it was all her sister's plan from the beginning. That Marie wanted to take me away from her. That was the second time Marie slapped her, telling her if she had been a fit mother she wouldn't have to be here and her marriage to me would have been fine but Annie chose to mess around. I threw her out of my house eventually. I didn't care where she went. The divorce happened and like the court ordered, I split everything in half and gave half to her. I moved with Marie for a while as per her request as I searched for a house, possibly in another state. Thankfully the kids did not miss a mother that was never there. They were too young anyway, they felt better being with their Aunt Marie. Things settled after a few months and I was on my feet again, mentally. I didn't care where or what Annie did and I haven't seen her since but the times I did, she would burst into tears begging me. Marie, like I said, was an amazing woman and just what I needed in my life. She brought me peace and healed me and after 2 years we were together, then engaged and about to get married. She has been the best thing that has ever happened to me. Even though I was in an insane amount of time, I can't help but look back on what happened as a good thing, because I would never meet the actual true love of my life. What terrible thing did your son do that made you wish death on him? I hate my twisted son and wished for him to die after he threatened my normal daughter with a knife. From the day he was born, my son just came out wrong. He was planned, my wife and I tried to get pregnant and were ecstatic when he was born. He was wanted and loved. We showered affection on him and really tried to give him a happy childhood. But from the day we brought him home from the hospital, he was miserable. He cried for 13 months straight. I'm not exaggerating, 13 months without a break, he cried until he had no voice left and kept crying. You could see his little face scrunched up and no sound coming out, totally hoarse. There were times he would literally be crying in his sleep. I've never seen or heard of any other kid able to do that. We brought him to doctors, specialists, tried changing his diet, held him, rocked him, toys, swaddling, music, mobiles, everything we could think of. Nothing worked. 13 months of grating, grinding, no sleep hell. Once he got over the crying stage, we thought we were out of the woods. But it quickly became clear that for some unknown reason, he was just angry at being alive. I never saw that kid have a genuine, joyous smile once in the time I knew him. I saw him grin a vicious, horrible grin many times, taking a perverse pleasure from causing pain or suffering or breaking a rule, but a smile from real pleasure at something nice? No, never. Not once. He had no interest in anything positive, he was fueled by hate, and everything he did was bent toward that. As soon as he could walk, his mission in life was to destroy things. He would break or try to break anything that came in his range, smash it, chew it, throw it in the toilet, whatever he could. After a while he figured out how to get his diaper off and took great pleasure in pooping and pissing anywhere he could. After a while he figured out he could hide it, and started pissing and pooping in places we wouldn't find right away, grinding it into carpets making it even more of a problem to clean and making the house stink. When he got older, ages 9 to 15, he would piss and poop in our bed, until we got a lock on our door and he wasn't able to get in anymore. Then he'd just take a dump in the hallway in front of our room. That biological warfare started around 2.5 years old and he never grew out of it. I'll try to speed it up as I could literally go on for days about this stuff, but as he grew older, he became more and more unmanageable. He would bite, kick, scream, scratch and spit at anyone trying to do anything with him. He was kicked out of school twice before he was 9, then let him back in and then kicked him out for good. He had to change schools. The next one put him in a special class that kept him away from the other students. We had to install a door and lock on the kitchen because he would steal knives and use them to gouge the walls/furniture or chase people with them. When he was 10, he stabbed me pretty good in the hip and ass. I still have the scars. As he grew older, he grew darker. He moved into setting things on fire and torturing local animals. There was a stray dog that hung out around the park near our house. My son blinded it in one eye with a barbecue fork. He would dip cats' tails in gasoline and light them on fire. He became a violent, stinking, vicious beast that lived in our house. We couldn't do anything with him. He saw a psychiatrist twice a week, and had God knows how many different medications prescribed to him over the years. Nothing worked. Therapy didn't work. Meds didn't work. Nothing effing worked. He was like a poison cloud of hate and fury lashing out at anything in his reach. When my son was 16, my wife got pregnant again. I can't tell you how different our reaction was. Instead of joy, we felt horror. This pregnancy had not been planned, and we really were at a loss over what to do. My son had been such an unending nightmare for 16 years, we couldn't take the idea of starting again from the beginning. We talked a lot about terminating, but A, access to abortion was not as easy in those days as it is now, and B, my wife was very against it. We talked about many options. In the end, we decided that my wife would have the baby, and if it turned out evil we would put it up for adoption. We knew we just couldn't do it again with another child like our son. We had a daughter. She was normal. Suddenly we saw what our lives should have been like the whole time, how things would have been had our son not been himself. She laughed at things. She breastfed without biting. She didn't have teeth yet anyway, but you could tell she was just trying to eat, not tear her mom's breast off. After 4 months she was sleeping through the night. She was happy. She was normal. I can't describe the relief and happiness that we both felt, I don't have the words for it. This is where I believe I may have started really pulling back from my son. Up until that time, whatever mistakes I made, I had always tried to do the best for my son, I am convinced of that. I tried to help him and love him and care for him, I really tried. But when my daughter was born, my wife and I both instinctively just turned toward her. She became our focus, not from malice, but just because she was so much easier. She was so happy and sweet, every moment we were with her was like magic. I understand this was wrong, but we honestly couldn't help it. I don't have a better explanation than that. My son hadn't cared about my wife being pregnant, I honestly don't know if he really understood it, but when we brought our daughter home he started acting out even more. I didn't think it was possible, but he took it up another notch. At this time he was 17, and we were having blowout screaming matches daily. Usually after we fought, he would storm out of the house and disappear for hours at a time, or come back the next morning. It was a relief. I started to actually look forward to our fights because it would get him away from us for a while. As a consequence of our son's behavior, we had invested heavily in locks around our house. All of the cheap, thin interior doors in our home had been replaced with thick, dense wood doors that couldn't be kicked through, equipped with keyed locks that my wife and I carried keys to. I know it sounds extreme, but locks and heavy doors were the best way we had found to create safe spaces from him. And again, before I am inundated with messages, I was not locking my son in rooms like a prisoner, he had free reign of the house and could come and go as he pleased. My wife and I would lock ourselves in rooms to protect ourselves from him. If anything, we were the prisoners in our own home. On the day in question, I had fought with my son in the morning and he had left the house in a rage. My wife and I were enjoying some peace and quiet in the kitchen while our daughter napped in our bedroom. And then my daughter began crying. Any parent who has young children can tell you, you get used to your child's cries and you can tell after a while what they need. They cry differently if they are hungry, or need changing, or are just restless and want to be held. Babies can communicate pretty well before they can speak. This cry was none of those things. This cry was terror. The second we heard it, my wife and I were both up out of our chairs and running to the room. The door was locked, of course, and it took a few seconds to get the right key and get it open. My son was in the room. We lived in a bungalow, and the bastard had climbed in the window to get to her. He was standing over her crib with a steak knife in his hand. I have no idea where he got it, it wasn't one of ours. We controlled our knives very carefully and always kept them in locked drawers. I think he may have stolen it from one of our neighbors' houses. He had broken her skin twice already, once in the belly area and once on her arm. I could see blood running down. When I entered the room he was dragging the back of the knife down her face, not cutting, almost tickling her with it, teasing her while she screamed. He looked up at us and smiled. Before I knew what I was doing, I was already moving, running to put myself between them. I didn't think about it, I just moved instinctively. Even with that, my wife got there faster. It was like a movie on fast forward. She got to our son and bashed his hand away, knocking the knife across the room and then shoved him with her whole body weight, so hard that he flew away from the crib and bounced off the wall. I picked up my daughter and held her while my wife screamed us. I could see her shaking, almost convulsing. I can remember the smell of the room, the sound of my daughter screaming and wailing. The look on my son's face as he stood there. Just nothing. Blank, dead, there was nothing in his eyes, no emotion. He looked like an alien to me. I watched my wife take a step toward him. I could have reached out and stopped her, but I didn't. She stepped forward again, very close to him. I could have stopped her again. But I didn't. She waited, looking at him for maybe 3 to 5 seconds without moving. And then she punched him in the face. When she hit him his head snapped back and blood started pouring out of his nose. He hardly reacted, he just looked at her with this shocked expression like he didn't know how to process what had just happened. She waited another second. And then she hit him again. I could have reached out and stopped her. I could have dragged her out of the room, taken her away, calmed her. I didn't. I just stood there and watched while she systematically started to pound him to a pulp. Every time he brought his hands to cover one part, she would blast him somewhere else, body, head, over and over. He started screaming, crying out, yelling for her to stop. It's the most genuine reaction I'd ever seen him have to anything in his whole life. But she wasn't stopping. I watched her ramping up, hitting harder, faster, working him like a heavy bag. He tried to swing at her and she slipped him easily. She was on autopilot, sinking down into her training. I stood there watching for a minute. Then I turned my back on them and took my daughter out of the room to clean her up. After an hour, I went to check, and what I saw actually made me feel some kind of relief. His nose was squashed flat out across his face, both of his eyes were completely swollen shut and starting to blacken already. I could see that a couple of his fingers were bent out at weird angles and he had pissed his pants. I think he must have been missing teeth, but I couldn't see any on the floor and I couldn't see inside his mouth. His lips were all puffed up and swollen. From talking to my wife about it later, I now know that she had systematically beaten every part of his body, focusing heavily on his legs. She told me she kicked him in the groin repeatedly until her legs got tired, and had kept beating his body long after he had passed out. When my wife came out of the shower where she went to clean up, I still didn't know what to do about our son. I didn't know whether to call the police or an ambulance, take him to the hospital myself. I honestly didn't have any idea what to do. After a while I realized that I simply didn't care what happened to him anymore, and we decided to just let him live or die on his own. I took my wife and my daughter away, we left in our SUV and drove down to the road headed towards the next town to her parents' house. We took everything we needed and left. We didn't run, we left. It was quite a peaceful drive, far away from that monster. As we approached the town, my wife sighed and asked, "Do you think he's dead?" "I sure hope so."